Hey everybody, welcome to the weekly roundup edition of the Daily Friend. That's right, this is your Friday edition of the show. I hope you guys have missed it. I have a full panel with me today, but before I get into any of that, remember you can become a friend of the IRR. This is our crowdfunding campaign, one that allows you to get involved and support the work that we do here. How do you do that, you're wondering? Well, you can SMS your name to 32823. An SMS will cost you R1 and terms and conditions do apply. Or you can find us online, as I always say, for you tech-savvy ones at irr.org.za, .org.za/join. And you can sign up a monthly debit order of 90 Rand there. And that's the funds. Those are the funds that get us into the battle of ideas and into the fight. Guys, interesting, jam-packed episode. It's not going to be long. It's about a 20-minute shoot. Let me introduce who I have in studio. In studio with me, I have the chief economist here at the IRR, Mr. Ian Cruickshanks. Meneer, how are you doing?
Good to be with you. Thank you again.
Great to have you here. And of course, the ever-wonderful Sara, who is our chief editor of the Daily Friend. Sara, hello.
Hello, hello.
And of course, Marius. No, I'm just kidding. And of course, head of campaigns here at the IRR, Marius Roodt. How are you doing, Marius?
Hello, Sichle.
Marius, of course, is going to have a very good chat with us today around a campaign that I think you guys should get behind as we secure your property rights. But more on that later. Guys, let's begin at the top of what I think we should discuss today, and that is the economics of the country. I mean, we've seen some numbers come out. Ian, I'll let you lead the charge on that. What's come out?
Most important event of all, domestically, has been the 2-monthly deliberation of the Reserve Bank's Monetary Policy Committee. This is where they decide on any change that may have been noted in the financial markets, in the events of the economy itself, in government spending, in consumer spending, in business investment, all these sort of things. And at the end of their 2.5 days of deliberations, I guess they've had a lot of tea and biscuits in that time.
Likely.
But what they come then is to a conclusion as what to do about interest rates, primarily the repo rate. What's the repo rate? That's the repurchase rate, and that is the base rate from which all others are set and based. They've decided on no change. It was a unanimous decision, which surprised market commentators to some extent. It had been anticipated that there may be a decrease, because of the low level of activity in the economy as a whole, and because of expectations that something must be done to stimulate it. Well, they decided against it, and this is interesting. When we look at what's coming on at the end of this month, the government's medium-term budget policy statement, or the mini-budget as is otherwise known, to give us an indication of what to expect for the year ahead on budget revenue and expenditure. And I think this is saying, hey, they're going to be cautious. They're concerned about revenue.
Yeah.
They're concerned about not having enough of it. And clearly, we're concerned as taxpayers as to where it is being spent.
Yeah.
So these have been the driving forces during the course of this week.
Ian, let me put something to you, and I think I'll open it up to everybody, really. We've been saying on the show for a while that the policy environment in this country is what stifles economic growth by and large. Is it fair to say that the Reserve Bank is also very cautious of this and would have been tracking the debate, the recent debate in the public, especially after the finance minister released that position paper?
Yes.
Could it be said perhaps that them holding the rate where it is right now could be a sort of wait and see approach to see where maybe that part of it, of course, is where that debate maybe plays out? Will we see some reforms, or will it be more of the same?
Wait and see, yes. Holding back the economy, no. Definitely not. This is a time to be very conservative. We're having an oil price moving by 10% from day to day.
Yeah.
Hey, think of what that's going to be doing to the inflation rate, to the potential of inflation rippling through all sectors of the economy. So, no, I think that they have done exactly the right thing. I don't think they should have done any more or less. And interesting that they had a unanimous decision of the Interest Rate Committee pointing to the fact that they were all agreed that monetary policy as they have it now is correctly settled.
Before I come to you guys, Ian actually brought up something which I was going to open up a little later. Ian, on this show and various iterations of it, and on the weekly High FM show that we now host every Tuesday at 9 a.m. on High FM, we had Gabriel talk to us about the attacks on Saudi Arabia and how essentially 5% of the world's oil supply, was disrupted during that incident. You've touched on the fact that the oil price has then seen a consequent volatility from that.
Sure.
Can you just unpack a little bit more as to what the effects on our markets would be if the oil price kept ticking up, for example, or even an erratic price? How would the ordinary South African would have felt that?
Well, the oil price clearly dominates energy, the cost of energy particularly, and the supply. There's no problem with supply at the moment, certainly despite the fact that it's socially not acceptable. We've got more than adequate coal supplies, enough for 100 years, so we can produce power. If only Eskom could work every day.
Wow.
But I think that what happens is that if you say the oil price makes up about 50% of the cost of the refined fuel that we buy in the petrol station, whether it's petrol or diesel or whatever. The rest is other government taxes and transport costs and so on. But if that 50% is disrupted, it has a major impact on the cost of energy, the cost of everything we produce. But then also remember, we do have Sasol, so in fact imported oil provides about 50% of our total fuel requirements before it gets refined. That's right. So it could have a major impact immediately, because it's not as if there's a stock of oil waiting to be utilized. It's too expensive to keep it in stock, and of course there's a security threat to it too. So yes, it could have a very serious impact, and if it can move by 10%, that is about $6 to $7, from $60 to $70 in overnight. Then it just says how immediate is that potential threat. If a couple of drones, the ones we see, seem fairly simplistic operations, if they can do this much damage in one hit, imagine if they got a whole fleet of them. It can happen.
Absolutely.
The technology is there, and I think that is why it's left a lot of nervousness. It has, for instance, had an impact in pushing the gold price. Safe havens are now being sought, and I think that this could affect us. It could then affect all of our consumers and business, and I think not just for immediate expenditure, for planning. I'm not going to build a new factory if I'm running a business if I think that I can't estimate the correct supply and price of fuel.
Colleagues, let me open it up, because there is a larger conversation to be had here, and I think Ian set out quite nicely what the various interest groups have been doing in response to various issues and incidents, whether it's the oil incident or the Reserve Bank responding to its triggers, etc., etc. But let's talk about the policy environment in this country, because unfortunately no movement, and I say no movement at all, has happened in this regard. Marius, the last major debate we had on policy in this country, again, was Tito's paper, and the consequent gnashing of teeth by the sort of gaggle of lefties and communists in this country afterwards. What needs to happen for a character like Tito, who doesn't have much in the way of friends in cabinet or in the ANC or whatever, to get some of those proposals in, just to give us a little bit of breathing and wiggle room in this country?
Well, I think he's going to need the support of the president. If the president's the one who's going to have to give him cover, and if he doesn't get it from the President Ramaphosa, then this is all going to be dead in the water. I mean, we've had some internal discussions here whether Tito's kind of the canary in the coal mine, and he's sort of Cyril's envoy to go see, how these reforms will be received in amongst the politicians and so on. But there's also a school of thought that Tito's done this off his own bat or through the treasury. So, I mean, it's I think it's all part of these ANC internal politics. But at least one heartening thing is that at least the reforms that we need, at least they are coming out of the ANC, or at least a part of the ANC, and at a very high level of the government. And Tito Mboweni, I don't know how powerful he is within the ANC, but he's obviously got a very powerful government position. So he's the Minister of Finance, which is one of the most powerful cabinet positions. And so I just wanted to mention one thing when we're talking about inflation. I saw it, Mark Schussler was saying, nearly all inflationary pressures come from administered prices that the government sets. For the private sector, the inflation pressure from there is actually quite moderate. So the only reason we're seeing inflation of 4 and 5% is because of the government, actually. So, I mean...
which is a major problem. Ian, I'm going to come back to you now. It's a major problem in terms of how much involvement the state right now has in the economy. It's almost crowding out also the private sector in large cases.
Well, we've seen with the tax, with the Laffer curve, the Laffer curve's happening now. We're collecting more tax than ever, but the revenue is actually going down because, I mean, and tax...
We've reached that point where the returns don't meet
the
increase
in money,
tax rates.
Money that could actually be used productively in the economy is getting sucked into this huge bloated government and not being used where it could be actually, creating more wealth and more economic activity in the economy.
I'm going to come to Ian and then to you, Sara. But Ian, maybe as you sort of open up here, I want you to also talk to us about some of the projections, perhaps, not necessarily the numbers, but the projections of tax revenue, the collection of it. Will SARS see a windfall of tax revenue, and it's going to be wonderful roses, and all the communist politicians will be happy because now they can spend on this wonderful socialist utopia that we're being promised? Or are we going to see hard numbers come through that paint a very different reality as to where we are economically?
The latter, most definitely. I think that Marius just mentioned the Laffer curve. You can keep pushing your tax rate up, but eventually people go away. They say it's not worth my while to do that business or to do it in your parameters. And this is a real danger. And I just wonder whether the president is prepared to take the sort of risks to allow this situation to go on. He says that he's the business sector's friend. Well, there's some debate about that. But nevertheless, what we're finding is we're making South Africa relatively...
difficult place to invest in.
Unattractive investment destination. And I think that's a big threat.
Sorry, I'm going to open that one up to you because this morning I tweeted a picture, Rob Beasley, one of the sort of very famous traffic announcers, blah, blah, blah. I don't know what is that job. I'm sure I wasn't sure how to sort of to call him.
But he some stuff on the radio.
But he tweeted an ominous picture. I can only call it ominous again, of a truck burning somewhere in Gauteng. It's a picture that we're far too used to seeing now. And Ian was raising the point of just how difficult it is to invest in the country. The one is policy, the other is just the sheer breakdown in the rule of law.
I think the problem is that at least some of the government, and I assume Tito Mboweni is the one, I'm not sure whether the president is another, knows that every policy decision that the government's made, say, in the last year is antithetical to what this country needs. So without growth, you get, for whatever reason and for whatever agendas are being followed, groups of people or a group of people who are torching trucks. And the complaint that I'm aware of is that simply the competition for existing jobs between shops or whatever.
All these attacks on entrepreneurs business. Yeah.
And I mean, yesterday, our Centre for Risk Analysis released a report on small business and the constraints it faces. And the guys speaking were talking about some of the constraints by giving examples. I've always known this. I've tried to create a small business myself, so I have a sense of it. The extent of what hamstrings small business in this country, and, big business does play a role because it crowds out small players. But the sheer weight of the government on small business ensures failure. I mean, businesses fail. That happens. But there is absolutely nothing to make a person want to create a business. And the problem is that the government has said they foresee, and I don't know why they say it, I don't know on what basis, that job creation is going to come from the small business sector. It can't. You wouldn't dare. You don't have the space to move.
Which brings us to the next topic. Colleagues, in this country, we've become accustomed to praising the leeches, so to speak, the political elite, that layer, if you will, of sort of all-consuming the black hole, if you will, of that is the political elite in this country. It just sucks up everything in its path. And we condemn, berate, and even insult those in society who are the productive guys, the risk takers, the ones who want to start something. We either call them clever blacks on the one hand, or white monopoly capital,
settlers and all kinds of
or
things,
settlers or land thieves. You name it. We go down the list of the names that the trendy lefties in this country have given us to berate those of us in society, whether black or white, who are the risk takers, the productive. Now, it's not just in name only, in name calling only. There's hard policy that's being proposed, that's being put forward, that is seeking to undermine further and erode further the appetite for one who wants to take risk and start a business. Chief of those is the attack on property rights in this country. The ability for someone, whether they're an individual in the form of a family or a business, to say, this is mine, I invest in it, I grow it, it benefits others, I get benefit from it too. Marius, I'm going to look to you. Of course, I'm talking about expropriation without compensation and the myriad of spin-off policies that come from
NHR, prescribed assets.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Let's look at
It's all
EWC, Marius. Yesterday, the Institute of Race Relations launched what I believe is the most comprehensive and effective alternative policy of any organization, I think, in this country. I'm not really going to ask you to focus on EWC. I think our viewers are quite well versed on it now. Talk to us about these proposals. Two came to mind, and were written by our colleague, Dr. Anthea Jeffrey. If you want to see the video of that particular launch of this policy, this alternative policy, please go to the IRR Facebook page. There is a video on there from the live feed. But Marius is going to talk to us very briefly about the two policy proposals. One was the Ipulazi, which is a Zulu word for farm, suggestion. And the second one is the Indlu suggestion, which is how we can secure property rights, in urban centers. Marius, clearly, concisely, Ipulazi, talk to us.
So Ipulazi, it's, as Sikhle says, from Zulu for farm, but we've also, it's a little acronym that we've created. So the first I stands for increasing the number of successful commercial farmers. P is providing innovative funding options. U is for upskilling new farmers. L is for land acquisition. A is augmenting rural infrastructure and essential services. Z is for zero tolerance of land grabs, farm invasions, and threats to property rights. And I is for individual title, whether it's it must be secure and registered. I just want to say I feel like I'm on Sesame Street or something like that.
I will spell this out on the screen so you guys can see exactly what we're talking about. But before you continue, Marius, I want to open it up. Guys, some of these proposals, securing individual land title in this country. Marius, what were some of the other ones? Just remind me.
So zero tolerance of land grabs or property rights. Upskilling new farmers, acquiring land for people to actually become farmers and so on. And I think this is a very important one, augmenting rural infrastructure and essential services. We've seen the breakdown, what's happening in our in the small towns. I think anybody, you travel a lot in the country, you can see what a lot of the small towns look like in South Africa now. Some of them don't even have tarred roads anymore. And that's not because they never had them, just because these things haven't been maintained. So
absolutely. Colleagues, the importance, let me begin with the one that really triggers me, so to speak, lol. The idea that for once in our history, in terms of this proposal, we're basically saying those individuals in this country, whether they lived under the colonial days, apartheid, or today, who have been denied property rights, the ability to fence off a piece of land and say, this belongs to me, or this belongs to the Ngobese family, the Cruickshanks family, whatever the case may be. This policy alternative is one which says, for once, we're giving those individuals who've been denied an opportunity to own something and therefore invest in it or leverage off of it to start something else. Sara, why is that important?
It's important because unless people own something, they're not going to have a stake in it. They're not going to care enough. They're not going to be motivated enough. And I'm worried that it's something that the government doesn't understand. It's also it's a very, very hard backbreaking work. So the commitment has to be absolute. But if you're not sure that you own something, if you're not sure that the government's going to, although they talk about it, but I don't have much faith in it, rebuild or create that infrastructure, I don't think a government-styled plan that does not take account of private ownership is going to work.
Ian, I'm going to come to you just now because I know there's a particular point you like making, but I'll segue to you just now. Marius, Sara is raising an important issue here that agriculture, farming is back-breaking work. 65% of this country now lives in urban centers. People are urbanizing ever increasingly, which brings us to the second policy proposal we made, the Indlu policy proposal. Quickly talk to us about that, please.
So, I mean, if we want where land reform actually has to happen is in the towns, as you rightly say, about 2/3 of South Africans live in cities. And so South Africa's future, like most of the world, is actually in our cities.
That's right.
So, but Indlu, which is a house in Zulu, I is individual tenure, which must be registered and enforceable. N is a national housing voucher program for disadvantaged households. D would be a diminished dependence on the state to step up to its own slow pace of provision. L is for land acquisition and servicing. I think that's also very important. I mean, you can't build anything if you don't have land for it. And U is for upgrading of informal settlements, which is also important. But I think there's just one point I want to make here where Sara said perhaps the government doesn't understand that people need to own property and stuff. I think a more terrifying prospect is that the government understands it very well, but they aren't very interested in actually, because they know South Africa is increasingly becoming a vampire state, where a state that just sucks and takes and doesn't give anything back to the people who actually pay taxes and so on. And I think, and we see increasingly the people who actually do pay taxes and so on are leaving the country in droves, and that's of all races. And Mark Schussler recently pointed out that over the last 5 years ago, 200 South Africans were leaving for New Zealand a month. It's 1,000 South Africans a month leaving now. Yeah. And I think this should worry all of us. And we can, if we don't see a government that actually wants to keep taxpayers here and realize that business and needs to work with business instead of seeing business as an enemy, we can, no proposals anybody makes will actually see a country that becomes prosperous.
Let me bring it all together. And this is where I'm going to bring you in, Ian. The Indlu proposal for me is very powerful because it speaks to two things that we're saying. If they can work in the rural parts of our country, it will work in urban centers. If we know that South Africans are moving to urban centers, then two things need to happen for those who maybe start out in an informal settlement because they don't have much in the way of property rights. One, you secure the availability of land for them. A municipality will service that land, will clearly demarcate it so that everybody has a site that they can then get a title deed for. And then the second point there, that second N, if I'm not mistaken, is the national voucher. Housing voucher program. Yeah, that's right. The idea that for a change, you take away the power and the resource from the state and officials and bureaucrats, and you give it directly into the hands of the property owner and say, look, the state's not going to build your house. We'll give you a service site. There's water, there's electricity, there's refuse collection, there's drainage. Sorry, I forgot the word I'm looking for here. We'll give you that. But in terms of building the actual structure, the state gives you a voucher for you to decide which artisans you bring in, where you get your equipment and your materials from. You build your home on that site. You mean to tell me that if we gave millions of South Africans, mostly poor black South Africans, that opportunity, we wouldn't see a springing of wonderful communities around this country, Sara?
Do you remember about a year ago there was a land invasion around the Protea Glen area, which was obviously very upsetting for the residents because they were people who owned decent houses for the first time. Alfred was one of them. They interviewed one of the invaders, and he said exactly that. He says, if the government would just give us a piece of land and electricity and water, we'll build the houses. And I remember the IRR pushing site and service in the mid-70s, and they were derided then, and they're probably being derided now. But the proof is in the pudding. That's what the people are saying.
Ian, this is where I come to you, because the larger point I'm making here really is the idea that these policy proposals, coupled with a growing economy that absorbs these individuals who are moving to the urban centers, gives them an income. From that income, they can build household savings. Yes. From those savings, they can invest further in their properties, whatever the case may be. Is that not the preferable society we're looking for, as opposed to politicians telling us to go back to the rural areas to live this fantasy life, I think they propose, of an agrarian lifestyle?
Let's start on your last point.
Yeah.
And it's been shown through research that the average person doesn't necessarily want to be a farmer. They don't want the land, they want the value of the land.
Yes. Because
that value gives them access to finance, and that gives them access to starting a business or service, whatever it is, in a built-up area. And it's interesting, if you go through some of the, what we used to call the previously dominated by poorer people areas, every garage, Every house has got a light bulb with somebody working on a sewing machine or somebody working on with a welding machine. Give them the opportunity to start their own operation, and they'll take it and move with it right away. And that way, if you teach somebody to lay a row of bricks, that person will go to his mother and say, I want to move out of your house. Lend me the money to buy enough bricks, and I'll build a place for myself and my family adjoining yours, yes. But when the neighbor sees that happening, he'll say, hey, can you do that for me? Yes, if you help me to move the wheelbarrow. Now you've got 3 people employed. And this is really, I think, the future key to spreading activity and wealth and generating the money that's needed to upskill the whole economy.
That's right.
And, of course, to provide education at a cost-effective price.
Guys, I must cap it off here. But before I do, Marius, it comes back to you. If you like these ideas, if you like these policy proposals, the Ipulazi alternative that gets land reform and land restitution right, that empowers individuals who want to farm, who want to secure their property rights in our rural areas. And of course, in terms of the urban setting, how do we eradicate the slums and the informal settlements in this country and give people hard rights to own their property, to build homes and form communities, and as Ian rightly points out, to then get an opportunity to build wealth and an economic activity in an area through the INGLU policy. How do people support this policy? How do they back us in getting into the fight of getting these ideas into our communities? What do people do to support the campaign, Marius?
Well, as always, people can SMS their name to 32823, or they can go to our website where they'll see the campaign page on the landing page, and there they'll see all the details. There'll be a video about yesterday's launch. There'll be the full document from Anthea, which gives a very very detailed overview of the history of land reform in South Africa and why the ANC government is pushing for EWC at the moment, the ideological imperatives behind it, and then provides these proposals, these solutions that we've given here. And of course, people can go read these. They don't have to agree with us, but if they got other ideas, also welcome to get in contact with us. And I think that's what we need, other proposals. EWC is not the solution for South Africa. But of course, we do need things to change in South Africa, and we need it to be done in a way where the rule of law is protected and people's wealth and property are also protected while making up for the wrongs of the past. So, and I think this goes a long way to doing that. So, but people, as I say, they can go to our website or SMS their name to 32823, and they can have a look at what we've said here, and if they agree with it, then they can give us the endorsement.
Awesome. Guys, thank you so much to everybody for joining me. And of course, thank you for joining us on this episode. Again, I must stress this. These are the ideas that we're fighting for. Ideas that place power back into the hands of individuals, back into your hands, and those of your family, and away from the politicians, away from the bureaucrats. And these are rights, these are privileges, if you will, that we should be according to all South Africans, not just the wealthy, not just the elites, but even the poorest amongst us, who often condescendingly we're told by politicians can't look after themselves, wouldn't be able to know what to do if they were given the means. We're saying poppycock. The means must go into their hands in very real terms, in terms of securing their property rights, and of course giving them a foot up, if you will, to begin to get involved in the economy and to build something for themselves. So you can watch out for those 2 policy proposals, and I really encourage you to read them, because you need to also arm yourself with good arguments, so that you stop falling for the race traps that we often get into this country, and you stop falling from the political nonsense that we hear. You're able to stand firmly and say, no, I want to see the INGLU policy, which empowers the individual in urban settings to get property rights and build something. And I want to see the Ipulazi alternative, which gives rural citizens an opportunity to start agribusinesses, grow wealth, and become prosperous, and change the landscape of our rural South Africa. Guys, thank you so much for watching this episode of The Daily Friend. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you, of course, next week. Remember, the show comes out every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. The 2 shows shows, one being on Monday and Wednesday, or the podcast, and of course the Friday show being this televised or visual show. Guys, thank you so much for watching. You've been watching The Daily Friend, and we'll see you next week.